This is the Thought Leadership Webinar Series. Miguel Adal here at Voler Systems, and we do these every month, maximum every six weeks. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, to Walt Maclay, our president and one of the panelists today, and also to our other panelists. You'll hear from Aaron Joseph, the principal consultant at Sunstone Pilot, as well as Russ Singleton, who runs his own consulting firm as well as my boss and the president of Voler. So we're going to start with some quick introductions. I'll start with you, Aaron. We'll go around and then we'll tee up the conversation for today. Aaron, you have a couple slides and I'll drive the slides for you.
Alrighty. So my name's Aaron Joseph. I'm a biomedical engineer and consultant for medical device companies. I help my clients with FDA compliance for new product development. Primarily, that's with better processes and tools. I help clients improve their quality system procedures for design controls, risk management, and software development. I also help clients implement and configure software tools like ALM systems and train their product teams to make the best use of the new processes and tools. For companies that want to quickly upgrade their quality system, I'm offering a package called Adaptive Design Controls, which is a set of integrated SOPs that are specifically designed for managing complex software-intensive medical devices, basically what we'll be talking about in this webinar. And of course, I also help my clients with the documentation required for new medical device development. For example, managing a complex risk analysis for a new product.
Wonderful.
My background is originally in R&D, way back when, systems engineering and test engineering. Over the past 20 plus years, I've worked on a wide variety of medical device development projects, everything from surgical robotic systems to medical imaging to catheters to IoT products, and at small and large companies. So over this time, I've learned a lot about what works and doesn't work for medical device development. And even though every product development organization is unique and every project is unique, after you've done about 10 to 15 projects at multiple companies, you start to see some common threads. And that's what forms the basis for my the experience and perspective that I bring to my clients. Go to the next slide, please. So one part of that perspective and is a framework called knowledge-driven product development, which I use to better understand how to tackle the challenges of medical devices. Now, there's many aspects to this, but one key aspect is that the number one job for a product team early in development is simply learning, and it's learning to close knowledge gaps or reduce project risks. Developing a new medical device, especially a complex one, involves many unknowns. And a focus on those unknowns and resolving them early means that you'll have more and more control over your project. Another way to think about it is that if you ignore all those project risks, all those unknowns, you'll find your project out of control. And I've been on those projects as well. Now, in the diagram, the milestone marked success assured is the point at which the product team has closed those knowledge gaps or reduced project risks to a manageable level. From that point onward, there's still a lot of design and development work to be done, but it's predictable work. And that's crucial in new product development. And it also means that the company can be confident that after all this effort, this will result in a successful new product. Now, some people will tell me, well, that's nice, Aaron, but there just isn't time for all that learning stuff at the beginning of our project. You know, we just need to dive in and develop the product because we're on a schedule. And unfortunately for them, and for me in many cases, those knowledge gaps don't go away by themselves. They will pop up at some point later in development when they're much more expensive to address. So something to keep in mind, this knowledge thread is interrelated with a lot of the issues that we'll be talking about in this webinar. So with that, I'll hand it over to Russ.
Okay. Hi, thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Miguel. My name is Russ Singleton. I am a consultant working as an interim leader and advisor to a variety of different companies, particularly in complex product development that includes medical devices. My background is in electrical engineering, and I've been working typically in systems products, started out in the semiconductor business, worked in the biotech side of business, and then later on came into medical devices. I have a lot of years of experience in working in very large and small projects in this area, but typically all in what used to be known as capital equipment development. You can go to the next slide. My focus has been working with teams in that are missing deadlines, if you will, project acceleration and de-risking. I have come in either in roles of running engineering or running even the whole business in helping the teams get refocused on what they need to do to get the project done. And as Aaron has pointed out, a lot of what we do is really focus on where the gaps are in understanding your customer and your customer requirements, making sure you have resolved that, and then getting the science out of product development is really a key aspect of what I try to do with teams and working with them. A lot of this has been called lean product development, sometimes called agile product development in hardware development. So that's a lot of what I've been doing and helping with and working with teams. Also working with teams and thinking through team structure in product development, working with complex equipment. It's usually aligning the teams, not along mechanical or electrical or software lines, but getting the teams working cross-functionally. Another aspect of what I've done over time is making sure that there's an innovative culture and a willingness to take risks, fail fast, fail early in what you're doing, and trying to understand how to think out of the box in terms of solving problems. And again, that has to do with crossing boundaries of discipline silos and working with teams coming from different kinds of backgrounds. I have done a lot of work with working with senior leaders and mid-level leaders and coaching them and acquiring the right talent, hiring people who fit into the culture of the organization. And then in many cases, very early on, I've gone out and done due diligence with small teams, trying to understand what the market requirements are. This is done very early in the development, but it is really key to understand what the customers, what Clayton Christensen calls understanding the customer's job and solving that problem rather than trying to sell your specific technology. That's it. Walt, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Russ. So Voler Systems is focused on electronic design and firmware and software. And we're experts in wearable devices, IoT, and medical devices. Most wearable devices are medical or health related. We've got a lot of experience with sensors, wireless communication, low power, that makes it ideal for us to be involved in wearable and IoT. And we do other things like motion control, firmware, FPGAs, and applications. Next slide, thank you. When we do product development, we typically do it in phases. Not everybody needs all the phases. Phase one is helping the customer define the product. Sometimes, in fact, very frequently, the requirements are not known at the detailed level that's needed, and we help with that, create an architecture, look at risks. Reducing risk early is a critical part of a successful project. And then making sure that we have a good budget and schedule. The phase two is the bulk of it, where we actually do the design, electrical, firmware, software. We use partners to help with mechanical and end up with a prototype. And then phase three is transfer to manufacturing, which is another key area that is often neglected. Once you have a schematic and a layout, you're not done. You've got to make sure that you have a transfer to manufacturing to be successful. So we've been doing this for more than 40 years. And the most important thing we do is help customers with the managing of the project so that the project, it goes well, is on schedule, on budget, and ends up successful. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, guys. So there you go. Those are the intros. When we have a panel, the intro goes a little longer, but we now have a really nice quorum of 55 people. That's, I think, certainly the highest attendance we've had this year. And so let's get to the brass tacks. Let's talk about the topic at hand, and let's have this conversation. I'll share one last slide, then I'll put the slides away, and we can just have a conversation between the panelists. We can also entertain questions from the audience and commentary as well. But essentially, maybe Aaron, you can tee us off. You and I, and the four of us, have been talking about some of these real life challenges that product teams face when they're dealing with complex medical devices. And you had helped us kind of land on these four key themes. And this is where folks want to walk away with, right? So can maybe starting with you, Aaron, and then Russ and Walt, can you maybe just touch on these before we get deeper into some of these themes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just sort of picking up on some of the things Russ was saying with that first bullet, creating the environment for success. So often the things that determine the success of a team is outside of the team. You have to think about the whole product development organization. But some things I can say that, are not going to necessarily be the most important, or it's more than just some new sophisticated software tool, in spite of what software vendors will tell us. That there's some, as Russ was saying, there's some key things about the culture of the organization, the willingness to take risks. What happens if the product team discovers that this product concept just isn't going to work? It's not feasible. Do they all get laid off? And then also, is your quality system actually set up for the type of product that you're developing? So that's kind of my process and tools angle on all of this. And Russ, Walt, you guys have a lot more to say, I'm sure. Sure.
Yeah. So let me jump in there. Just adding on to what, so just a little background. Aaron and I guess it was about a year and a half ago, wrote a series of blogs that are posted on his SunPilot website. So if you're interested in digging in a little bit more, you take a look at his website and you'll see some of those. What I had said in one of those blogs is, what's the first thing you do? Stop. You make sure you have the right requirements, and that means really understanding where your product is going to fit into the customer's job and how to do that. And it really means that you have to understand that fit pretty exquisitely in terms of what they want to do and how they want to make money and how they want to be successful. Typically, I've done that with 2 or 3 people coming from both the marketing and engineering disciplines, going out and trying to understand that. But the second part of that is what Aaron had in his slides, which is really getting the science out of the engineering. Don't try and tackle things that you don't understand. If you have it all, if you've done the science work, then great. Then you can start the project. But if you haven't, don't try and do the science work in the middle of the development, because you're going to just run into problems and have to do it over and over and over again. And then, as Aaron had pointed out, in creating an environment for success, you want to have some kind of process that you're using, and typically a process that allows for iterations, so that you can break up the pieces and do them in small chunks and iterate until you get it right. And then the only other thing I'd say is you want a team that's cross-functional, not just within engineering, but inviting marketing, inviting manufacturing earlier on in the development, so that you're thinking about getting it across the finish line. And the finish line, as Walter pointed out, is into manufacturing, not having a prototype, but having something that is in manufacturing. And if it's a medical device product that has you've achieved 510K or whatever, wherever you are in your development. Okay, Walt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, project project is primarily about the people and the communication. Even in a complicated project with a lot of technical issues, the bigger issues I've found are always getting the communication to work well and the planning to go well. To do that, you need to have very good requirements at the beginning. And if you don't have requirements, which is fine, you need to work on those before you try and design the device. Don't do it without clear, complete requirements. You need a schedule and a budget that everybody agrees to. You don't want to have a project that you begin developing where manufacturing, marketing, and technical support don't even know about it. They better be involved. You want to identify the risks early. There may be technical risks, marketing risks, schedule risks, budget risks. You want to identify those early and mitigate them as much as possible, as Aaron pointed out, to the point where you can proceed predictably. So if you can get everybody to communicate well and do these things, that gives you successful projects.
What are the key takeaways? How can a medical device company be sure that they are developing the right product?
Well, so I talked, both Aaron and I, and we'll talk about this a little bit earlier. It's making sure you get your requirements right. But more to the point, let's say we're sticking with medical. I was in robotic surgery for a few years, and you really need to get out and talk to the surgeons, get it in and see surgery, and make sure you understand where you're going to fit into that, and then get an active medical consultant who is likely a surgeon to help you in figuring out some of those issues. And then what we did, and I think makes a lot of sense, is it's a combination of getting the science out and getting the right requirements. So you prototype, you build prototypes that you can actually show to people. They can be paper prototypes or they can actually be a physical prototype that you can get some answers to. We did a lot of surgical instruments, and it made sense for us to be able to build just working pieces that you could do on cadavers, and then get the surgeon to say, I don't like that, or this is great, this is how it needs to be able to work. So you need to get feedback. That's really, really key in what you're doing. I'm going to pass it on to somebody else to add to what I'm saying here.
So I can, from a quality system standpoint, I can't say that there's strong things that you can do with your quality system to encourage or require the kind of things that Russ is talking about, because that front end is in many ways sort of outside the realms of or just beyond the realm of regulated. But I certainly have I've seen a number of project failures that are closely related to what Russ was just describing. So if you don't clearly know what your customer's needs are, what that job the product needs to do, you can be way off in product development. And so many years ago, I started a new consulting project, and I met with one of the senior engineers, and they had already gone into pilot builds of this capital equipment. And I asked him all these questions about it, and I'm accustomed to the designers being like super proud, like this is their baby. He was not at all proud of it, and kind of distanced himself from it like it was this ugly baby. And what I found out later was that even though it was a second generation product, this company just they hadn't done the meetings with surgeons, then they hadn't done all that upfront, like what are the features that our customers want? And they ended up with something that not only had like the wrong ergonomics, it had the wrong set of features. And it ended up being I think tens of millions of dollars down the tube, and they had to start over. So that was probably the worst case scenario. But if the very beginning of your product development is wrong and you're sending your team off in the wrong direction, the longer they go in that wrong direction, the more expensive it will be.
Well,
and you'll have a big, ugly baby at the end.
This is not my area, but I had an expert in marketing tell me that, how do you know when you've got enough information to understand what your customer needs? And he said, when you go in and talk to another customer, you should already know what he's going to say, and then you have enough information.
That's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my experience too.
And the flip side of that is that you should assume that your initial product concept is wrong. Maybe a little bit wrong, or maybe a lot wrong, but you got to go check it out and to see if you're heading in the right direction.
Let's move on to another big question. And I did see Don Parker, you had a question. I will not forget your blockchain question. We'll come back to it in a little bit. But let's just go to the next one. And Aaron, I'll start with you. We've touched on a lot of this already in our 30 minutes together, but how do you avoid big surprises when tackling development of a complex medical device?
Yeah. So I think one way to think about this is that developing a complex medical device is like a simpler medical device, except it's on a much larger scale. So any issues you run into are going to be greatly magnified, sometimes by orders of magnitude. And you have, from a people standpoint, you have a lot larger product teams, and often they're more diversified, so more multidisciplinary. They're likely to be in multiple organizations. You might have multiple development partners. Let's say you're developing a new medical imaging system. You're not going to have everybody in-house. You're working with a company like Voler and other companies to bring it all together. So that means communication is going to be key. It also means that product data and how you manage the product data is going to be key. So things that would be straightforward to do with, some Google Docs and G Sheets or whatever, all of a sudden becomes far more complex and can actually undermine development. If you can't keep up with the data, with the communication across all these people, and to make sure that you have tools that will support this scale. So I've worked with companies where their quality system just didn't support larger scale product development. It was very much designed for something quite small that could be easily listed on a few pages or a simple spreadsheet.
So I'd like to jump in and add something to this. In thinking about things that cross discipline barriers, part of medical device development is thinking about risks, but you want to do this also from a perspective of the technology risks. You need to do the brainstorming, if you will, with a cross-functional team to be able to do the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? How am I going to solve that? You don't have to solve it all up front, but you have to have a thought experiment, if you will, to be able to say, I think this is going to happen. So we need to build this into the project plan to go down this discovery route and figure it out. And if it is science, then do it up front. It's really key that you touch the different types of things that happen. It reminds me of when I was doing development, we ran into surprises, if you will, in the sterilization process of a lot of the pieces that we had. It was like, where did this come from? And then we had to go down that rabbit hole and solve it. And bringing in outside experts to help us solve that helped a lot. So, don't think just within the confines of the boundaries of what you have in-house. Use consultants as you need them, especially when you're looking at expertise that you don't have in-house.
That's very good. Identifying risks is the key to not having surprises later. And in a complex project, some of those risks are not obvious. You want to have the insight of a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds.
Yeah. And so along those lines, I always look, from a project standpoint, to see multiple integration points, in effect, multiple cycles of design, build, test. And that sort of flushes out those hidden issues that Walt was mentioning, because it's very hard. You can get some very expert designers in a room, but there are some things that they're just not going to see until we build it and test it and integrate all these parts coming from maybe different organizations. And I also add one more tip in here that's particularly challenging for medical device companies. if you're tackling a much more complex medical device development, you need to think about a more modular approach to your compliance documentation. I've seen a lot of companies where they try to put everything in just a few documents, but that you may have 50 or 100 times more information simply to handle. And so a divide and conquer strategy for the documentation is much more practical and much more maintainable over time.
Very good, Aaron. Thank you for that. Yeah, and just keeping the momentum going then, Walt, I'll start with you. Something else that came up, and this is related to these risks questions and surprise questions, but how do you proceed in a development project when you have so many unknowns?
Well, once you've identified the unknowns, the first thing you want to do is mitigate them. There's a tendency for engineers to say, well, let me do this easy thing first, because I know what to do there. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. You better address the hardest ones first. And there's, sometimes you have to do a design, sometimes you have to do some research. It's not always the same thing, but you want to be sure you understand how you're going to take care of that risk.
I'm going to jump in here and add that it depends, if you have a small company or a large company, you'll take different tacks. I've been in a lot of startups, so, there might be a tendency to try and tackle things in a serial fashion. You can also outsource parts of the unknowns to contractors or vendors that who have an expertise in that area, and just have them tackle that unknown and come up with a potential solution for that. But you really do want to get those things out of the way, and it's sometimes difficult to do it other than in a serial fashion, and it does take money to be able to do that. This is what adds to the development cost, if you will. But it's better to tackle it up front than to leave it later on in the development, where it's going to cause you to go backwards and have to redo a lot of different pieces that are connected to it.
We've been involved in projects like that where the question was, how many different ways can you think of to sense this parameter that we need to measure?
Most quality systems in most medical device companies I've found are not comfortable with unknowns. So from a quality system standpoint, making sure that your product development process actually allows for unknowns and lots of investigatory or analytical work at the front end of development is really crucial. You want to be very rigorous and under tight change control at the end of product development. But if a team doesn't have the flexibility up front, they won't be able to do the kinds of things that you guys are talking about without sort of butting heads with the quality system. So that flexibility up front at the front end of product development is really important. To me, conceptually, what I want to see in, let's say, the design controls at a medical device company is a ramping up of the control part of design controls, and which means that if you think about sort of cost benefit for change control or risk benefit, there's very little risk up front. And there's a lot of cost because you need to make a lot of changes and you want to do them rapidly. Like you're learning, you want to be discovering these things to make a better product ultimately. As you proceed through development, that balance starts to change to the point at which, if you're going to make a change now, we better very carefully analyze it, look at the change impact assessment, et cetera. A lot of the companies I work with, they basically have one size fits all, very early stage development or very late stage development or post-market changes to the product. It's all the same process, and that just doesn't fit well.
So Aaron and I had talked about something that I had, or a team that I had under me called Phase Zero, which is very early on, pre-control stage, if you will, of medical device development, where you can build prototypes, if you will, breadboards, if you will, test them on cadavers or test them on animals. Now, it becomes a real tricky thing if in your case, you have to actually test it in a live human. And I haven't had the direct experience on that, but I'm sure other people have, where you have to do that under physician guidance and do it under an IRB and that kind of thing. But the idea is you want to get as much of the iteration out of it up front before you're into the control phase of it. And then, as Aaron said, ease your way into the signature loop. You know, do it so that it's only a few signatures that you need to get until you're further along in the development.
Now, what I've seen at startups is the inventor tries it on himself if he needs to do a human trial early on.
And we don't recommend that.
It's done all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, Russell, Aaron, Walt, thank you so much for the panel portion of our presentation. I, for one, learned a lot, and I'm sure the other participants did as well. Thank you so much for today. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Miguel.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.